They fired me with a smile. After 18 years, after building the very code their company still runs on. "We're bringing in fresh perspectives," the new CEO said, sliding termination papers across the table like I was furniture to be replaced. I walked out without a word. What they didn't know, the system they depended on was never really theirs. 3 days later, their calls started. Panicked, desperate. The platform was failing, and I was the only one who could fix it. But I wasn't coming back. Not on their terms. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about what comes after. "We're bringing in consultants with fresh perspectives," Julian said, his tone smooth, practiced, as he slid a stack of termination papers across the table. Mahogany wood. Polished. Cold. I stared at the packet for a second, then looked at him. Custom suit. Subtle cologne. That faint smirk executives wear when they think they've done something bold. He didn't know the system. Never asked how it worked. Never stayed late. Never understood what it meant to build something brick by brick. Only how to dismantle it cleanly. I didn't argue. Didn't ask for a second chance. I picked up the papers and nodded once. I understand. Then I stood, walked out without a sound. HR followed me to my office like I might steal a monitor or sabotage the servers on my way out. The same servers I'd maintained for 18 years. I boxed my things quietly. My coffee mug, a framed photo of my wife and kids, a couple of awards collecting dust, and one small hard drive. Mine. I wiped down the desk out of habit. Donna from accounting passed by, stopped mid-step when she saw the box. "Caleb, what's happening?" I smiled, thin and tired. Time for fresh perspectives. The new CEO had been in charge for 3 months. Julian Keene, brought in by the private equity firm that acquired us last year. He was the type who said things like synergy and disruption without understanding what either meant. The kind of guy who valued slide decks more than uptime. He'd fired 2 department heads in his first month, consolidated teams, brought in his Stanford buddies as consultants. I was the next piece to remove. Too expensive, too legacy. I walked past the security desk. Tyler nodded at me, awkward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer." "Not your fault," I said. Then I stepped into the rain. No music on the drive home. No calls, just windshield wipers cutting through the Seattle gray. I parked in the driveway, sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard like it might offer answers. Then I carried the box inside. Karen wasn't home yet. The house was quiet. I set the box on the kitchen counter, opened it slowly, touched each item. Familiar, meaningless now, except for the hard drive. That I'd protected. I made a pot of coffee, sat at the table with my personal laptop, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside, source code, documentation, legal records, the original algorithm, written before Iron Veil ever signed me, before I had a badge, before Julian learned how to tie his tie. It had my name on it, not the company's. Copyright registered, time-stamped, bulletproof. I'd licensed it to them, a detail the new regime never bothered to notice. I sipped my coffee and watched the rain slide down the window. The house was quiet, calm, but I knew something they didn't. The system would start breaking by morning, and when it did, they'd come calling. Not out of respect, out of desperation. The silence was louder than the layoff itself. No farewell party, no handshake from the board, just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I carried my box down the hallway I'd walked for nearly 2 decades. The same hallway where I'd once sprinted during a system outage, where I'd high-fived teammates after product launches, where I'd once dropped to my knees to fix a server cable during a blackout. Now I walked it like a ghost. No one stopped me. Most didn't even make eye contact. Donna tried. She started to say something again when I passed her desk, but her voice caught. I gave her a small nod. No blame. Just a goodbye we weren't allowed to have. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. Tyler, the security guard, waited by the front door, looking uncomfortable in his uniform. "Do you, need help to your car?" I almost smiled. I think I can manage one box." He held the door anyway. I stepped out into the gray drizzle of a Seattle afternoon, each raindrop cool against my face. The same kind of day we'd launched our first product. I remembered standing on the roof with Harold, watching the sun break through clouds, thinking we'd built something unbreakable. Turns out, nothing is. I set the box in the passenger seat, turned the key, and pulled away without looking back. It didn't hit me until I turned onto the highway, how hollow it felt. 18 years, gone in under 18 minutes. I'd been there longer than some marriages last. I'd built their foundation. Now I was just out. The mug in the box still had the chip from when I dropped it during the 2015 server crash. The photo of my kids was taken the week I missed Olivia's recital to stay late and fix a corrupted database. And the hard drive? That held everything they didn't understand. My personal documentation. My code. The original version of the architecture they still ran their empire on. They thought they were cutting weight, saving money, replacing an old part with something newer, sleeker, less expensive. What they really did was remove the one person who knew what was holding it all together, and they had no idea they'd just created a fracture in the foundation. Back home, I carried the box inside. Karen's car still wasn't in the driveway. I placed the contents on the kitchen table with care, one item at a time, like artifacts. I stared at the hard drive for a long moment, then plugged it into my laptop. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. Just tired. And ready. They wanted fresh perspectives. They'd get them. But not the kind Julian expected. The drive clicked softly as it came to life. Old tech by today's standards, but reliable. I'd used it to back up my personal projects for years. Stuff that never touched the company's servers. Stuff that mattered. My fingers moved by muscle memory as I opened the folder labeled Foundry. Inside, lines of code, documentation, even scanned copies of the original licensing agreement. It was all there. Neat, dated, registered. This wasn't an accident. It was insurance. I'd written the core of Ironvale's platform in a crammed one-bedroom apartment, 6 months before I ever met Harold or shook hands with anyone from the company. I was freelancing then, building solutions no one had asked for but everyone needed. The algorithm that became Ironvale's backbone, inventory mapping, predictive restocking, real-time data reconciliation. I built it on my own time, on my own machine, fueled by takeout and insomnia. Harold didn't buy the code. He couldn't. He didn't have the money. What he got was a license. Exclusive, perpetual, but conditional. Contingent on my continued employment or a written separation agreement. It was all in black and white, notarized, time-stamped, and filed with the Copyright Office. We were a startup back then, doing things by hand. And thank God we did. That paper trail was bulletproof. The newer management never bothered to read it. I scrolled through old comments in the code, sarcastic notes to myself, reminders, technical hacks I'd patched together at 3 a.m. The system had evolved over the years, sure, but its heart? Still mine, still untouched. The architecture was layered, abstracted, masked to look like something anyone could tweak. But the deeper logic? Obscure. Intentionally so. Not malicious. Just protective. It wasn't designed for consultants. It was designed for builders. They were going to learn that the hard way. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence. Karen came home an hour later. I didn't mention the drive. Not yet. We had dinner like any other night. Talked about Olivia's school project, the broken fence in the backyard, the grocery list. Life moved forward, as it always does. Later that night, I sat alone in the office, reviewing the license agreement again. My name, my signature, Harold's too. And the clause that mattered most. Modifications required written consent from the original creator. They'd never gotten that, which meant any changes to the algorithm were a violation. They thought they fired an engineer. What they really did was break a contract. They didn't just let me go. They triggered the trap I'd built 18 years ago, not out of spite, but out of experience. I'd seen too many developers get burned, lose everything they'd built to companies who claimed ownership after the fact. Not this time. The system was already starting to groan under their changes. It wouldn't be long now. The first call came at 10:17 a.m. I saw it flash on my phone while I was halfway through replacing a warped board on the backyard fence. Iron Veil Technologies. Main switchboard. I didn't answer. By 10:24, 2 more came in, one from Julian's direct line, the other from an unknown number. I let them ring, let voicemail pick up. The sun was out, rare for Seattle in spring, and the cedar planks I'd stacked the day before were waiting. I measured, cut, and nailed each one with the kind of care I used to give line-by-line reviews of production code. Clean, precise, solid. At 10:41, I took a break and checked the voicemail. "Caleb, this is Julian. Listen, we're experiencing some irregularities with the core systems. Some sort of cascading failure. The consultants are doing their best, but we really need your insight on this. It's urgent. Please call me back. ASAP." No apologies. No acknowledgement of how we left things. Just panic, wrapped in corporate polish. I deleted the voicemail and went back to work. By noon, 5 more calls had come in. 2 former team members texted me. "Systems crashing. What's going on? Nobody can trace the root cause." Another added, "They broke something in the algorithm. We're losing client data." I read each one and said nothing. These weren't people I blamed. They were stuck in the middle. But it wasn't my system anymore. Not legally, not ethically. They made that choice. I wiped sweat from my forehead and went back to the fence. I finished mid-afternoon, hammer echoing in rhythm with the growing chaos I imagined unfolding back at headquarters. My phone buzzed with another alert. Voicemail transcribed automatically this time. "Caleb, please, we need to talk. We're hemorrhaging contracts. The consultants don't understand your architecture." I didn't reply. Instead, I made dinner. Karen asked about the fence, said it looked good. I nodded, poured her a glass of wine, and helped Olivia with her math homework after we ate. We watched a movie. I turned my phone off. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the thought of an after-hours failure. This one wasn't mine to fix. That night, I sat on the back porch alone and stared at the fence. Clean lines. No gaps. A small thing, but built right. My old code had been the same, but they'd poked at it, prodded it, tried to modernize it without knowing how it worked. They didn't read the documentation. They didn't ask. They assumed they knew better. Now they were reaping the fallout, and they still didn't know just how deep it went. I met Harold Voss in the spring of 2004 at a tech conference in Portland. He was standing by a folding table covered in crude mock-ups and empty coffee cups, pitching Iron Veil to anyone who would listen. Most people walked right past. I didn't. We started talking after his demo crashed mid-sentence. I asked if he'd considered dynamic indexing to solve his database bottlenecks. He raised an eyebrow. Thought about it. Couldn't make it work. I asked if he had a napkin. 20 minutes later, I'd sketched out the basic structure of what would become Iron Veil's core system. 3 weeks after that, he hired me. There was no HR department, no onboarding portal, just Harold, his brother-in-law, and 3 developers working out of a rented warehouse that reeked of industrial cleaner and stale pizza. But there was potential. The product had promise. It just couldn't scale. That's what I brought. Not just clean code, but structure, vision. In those early days, we weren't building a company. We were building an organism, alive, evolving, fragile. Every line of code mattered. Every crash was personal. We stayed up for 36-hour marathons during launch weeks, debugged in our sleep, ate terrible food and argued about syntax at 3 a.m. I missed my daughter's first steps working on our server recovery protocol. Karen almost left me twice that year. "You're married to that company," she said. She wasn't wrong, but I believed in what we were building. The algorithm took shape in my apartment, months before I officially joined. I built it on an old laptop with a cracked screen and a fan that rattled like a dying engine. It was part obsession, part therapy. A way to solve a problem no one else had figured out. Inventory prediction, demand flow, decentralized syncing, all bundled into one elegant logic engine. It worked, beautifully. When Harold offered me the job, I didn't hand it over. I offered him a license, exclusive, perpetual, but conditional. It was my safety net. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew companies change. Founders retire. Boards replace visionaries with strategists. I'd seen it before. I knew how fragile loyalty could be once money entered the equation. Harold didn't argue. "You built it, you should own it," he said. "We'll use it, but it's yours." We signed the agreement at my kitchen table. 2 witnesses, 1 notary. Filed it with the Copyright Office 2 days later. That document never changed. Through every scaling milestone, every investor pitch, every chaotic product launch, it remained untouched. Even when Harold had his heart attack in 2011, and I took the reins of the technical side to keep the company alive, I never let them absorb it. And when the company was sold in 2019, I kept quiet. The private equity firm never asked about licensing, never read the paperwork. They assumed ownership came with the building. They were wrong. I built the heart of their system, but they never owned it. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee the next morning, my inbox had turned into a disaster log. Subject lines in all caps. Words like urgent, escalated, failure. The consultants had tried patching something overnight. Whatever they touched made it worse. I scrolled through panicked messages from old colleagues, some asking for help, others just trying to understand how everything could unravel so quickly. The core syncing process was misfiring, inventory data looping, real-time tracking stalling out. Clients were already pulling usage reports, and nothing made sense anymore. My favorite came from a former junior engineer. "Did you encrypt the logic to keep it secret?" I laughed out loud. "No, I documented everything. Just not in the way you explain to someone who thinks architecture is a line on a spreadsheet." By noon, the legal threats started. An email from Iron Vale's legal counsel arrived, marked confidential, action required. They cited proprietary knowledge and retained obligations under employment. It was all thinly veiled. I knew the tone. They were reaching, looking for anything they could hold over me, anything that might force me back into their mess. I forwarded the email to my attorney without replying. 2 hours later, he called, barely containing his amusement. "They clearly haven't read your original contracts. You're clean, Caleb. They don't own the algorithm, and you're not obligated to assist. Let them try. The only thing they're doing is digging a deeper hole." More calls came in, voicemails. A few sounded desperate. One, Julian again, barely holding it together. He mentioned client escalations and strategic interventions. Not once did he mention my name. Just, "We need technical alignment from the original architect. Corporate language for 'we screwed up. Please bail us out.'" I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened my records, and began organizing everything: email threads, licensing documents, code snapshots. Not because I planned to sue, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I knew where this was heading. They'd blame me eventually, try to spin it. So I made sure the timeline was locked, clean, undeniable. That evening, I got another message, this time from Rebecca, one of the few engineers still fighting to keep the system upright. They're throwing everything at the wall, nothing's sticking. Julian's yelling in meetings. Some consultants walked out. It's chaos here. I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about replying. Just a short line, something supportive. But I didn't. The only thing worse than staying silent was giving them hope I might come back. The damage was already done. Not by me. By their arrogance, their assumptions, their belief that legacy meant disposable. I hadn't lifted a finger. And still, the collapse had already begun. The crash came on a Wednesday. Not a glitch, not a hiccup. A full-on systemic failure. 3 regional hospital networks lost access to their dashboards. Supply chain coordination froze. Warehouses couldn't process incoming shipments. Phones rang across the company like alarms. The consultants tried rerouting processes manually. Bad idea. They introduced a recursive loop into the syncing module, and within an hour the backup servers went dark too. I knew the moment it happened. Not because I was watching, because my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 6 missed calls. Julian. 2 VPs. 1 board member whose number I hadn't seen since Harold retired. My inbox exploded with urgent requests marked with escalating priority. Words like breach, liability, and client termination risk started flooding the subject lines. Then came the text. Julian Keene, we need to talk immediately. High-level consulting opportunity. $300 HR starting. All expenses covered. Please respond ASAP. I stared at it for a long time. The man who couldn't make eye contact while firing me now wanted me back. Quietly, of course. A whisper behind the scenes. No apology, no admission. Just a dollar amount and a digital olive branch. I deleted the message. That afternoon, they issued a system-wide advisory to all clients, blaming unexpected performance issues related to a recent upgrade. A lie. No upgrade had been tested properly. No changes were approved by architecture. They were flying blind, building on something they didn't understand. The algorithm they tampered with wasn't fragile. It was precise, balanced. Alter one node without understanding the dependencies, and everything shatters. That's what happened. They opened the hood, thought they saw a simple engine, and started ripping out parts to impress investors. And now, clients were threatening legal action. A pharmaceutical client with multi-state distribution canceled their contract. A government agency paused renewal pending review of technical integrity. The loss in revenue would be felt by week's end. Still, I said nothing. Karen found me in the garage later, organizing tools I hadn't touched in months. "They're calling again?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Every few minutes." "You going to answer?" I shook my head. "They didn't need me, remember?" She didn't smile, just nodded and handed me a rag to wipe down a wrench. That night, another email landed in my inbox. Subject: urgent, consulting contract proposal. Body: Caleb, the situation is critical. We're prepared to offer a 6-month contract at full salary, no strings attached. We need your help stabilizing the platform. Call me. No strings. Except for the part where I'd have to hand back what was mine. Let them rewrite history. Let them claim I was part of the solution, not the one they cut loose. I didn't even open the attachment. Let it crash. Sometimes the system has to break completely before people realize what it was holding together. The email from Elaine landed in my inbox like it had been waiting for just the right moment. Subject: checking in. Coffee soon? It was short. No pitch, no urgency. Just a line that reminded me someone out there still saw value without a disaster forcing their hand. I remembered meeting her at a developer summit last spring. She'd been impressed with Ironvale's architecture, asked me deep, nuanced questions that no one from the acquisition firm ever did. Back then, I told her I was happy where I was, loyal, embedded. She handed me her card anyway. I kept it in my desk drawer. Never needed it, until now. I replied that afternoon. Coffee turned into lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant in Bellevue, away from the buzz of downtown. She was already seated when I arrived, laptop closed, phone upside down. I appreciated that. Most execs these days couldn't go 30 seconds without checking something. "You look rested," she said with a small smile. "Guess unemployment suits me," I replied. She didn't waste time. "I've been following what's happening at Ironvale. Their system's been down nearly a week. People are nervous, especially in healthcare." I nodded but didn't confirm anything. Let her draw her own conclusions. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, an offer. Chief Innovation Officer. Meridian Systems. A team of my choosing. Double my last salary. Significant equity and freedom. Real freedom. To build, to design, to lead without needing to justify every decision to a boardroom full of finance majors. "We want to create the next generation of what you built," she said, "but with the right people in place this time, and with you at the center." I closed the folder slowly. It was tempting, more than tempting. After 18 years of patching leaks and holding together someone else's ship, here was a chance to build my own, but I wasn't ready to answer. "Let me talk it over with Karen," I said. "And there's still some dust settling." She nodded. "Of course, but I want you to know, we're not offering you a rescue. We're offering you a runway." That stuck with me. I drove home in silence, folder on the passenger seat, just like my box from Iron Vale had been a week earlier. Same seat, same weight. But this time, the feeling wasn't loss. It was possibility. That night, I told Karen about the offer. She listened, thoughtful. "Would you be happy there?" she asked. "I think I could be," I said. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time." Maybe. But something in me wasn't quite done. There were still calls coming in from Iron Vale, still emails, still people asking questions I knew they didn't have answers to, and I couldn't shake the feeling that before I moved forward, I had to finish something first. They showed up just after dinner, black sedan, matching suits, the kind of men who don't knock twice. Karen saw them through the window first. "There's someone outside," she said, setting down her glass. I looked up from the dining table, already knowing. I opened the door before they reached it. "Mr. Mercer?" the older one asked, flipping open a badge that meant nothing to me. "We're here on behalf of Iron Vale Technologies regarding a matter of intellectual property developed during your employment." There was no greeting, no pretense of courtesy, just a veiled threat wrapped in legalese. "We'll need access to your personal devices," the younger one added. "Standard procedure. We need to verify that no proprietary code was removed or stored off-site." I didn't flinch, didn't smile. I just reached into my back pocket and handed him a card. "My attorney will be handling any communication on this matter. You can direct your questions to him." They glanced at the card, then at each other. They hadn't expected this to go smoothly. "We'd prefer to avoid formal escalation," the older one said, shifting his tone slightly. "This can be handled quietly if you're cooperative." "Then quietly leave my property," I said, holding the door open. "I have nothing else to discuss." They hesitated for a moment, then retreated. No raised voices, no threats, just disappointment. They came expecting chaos. They found preparation. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. Karen stood in the hallway, arms folded. "They're really trying this now?" "They're desperate," I said. "They're hoping I panicked, hoping I screwed up something they can use." "But you didn't," she said, not as a question. I shook my head. Every line of that code was written before I joined, on personal time, personal hardware, registered, documented, licensed under terms they never even read. She nodded once and went to check on the kids. I stayed behind, still for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of our house, the same quiet I never had in 18 years of firefighting someone else's system. That night, Julian called again. His voice was tight. "Your lawyer's being difficult," he said. "This could get messy, Caleb. Legal battles, press, disruption. None of us want that." "What do you want, Julian?" 6 months, full salary. Help the transition team understand the system. Then we part ways clean. We keep the rights. You get a clean break. I paused. Let the silence stretch. "The core algorithm was never Iron Vale's property," I said. "I licensed it, before I was even an employee." "That's absurd. Everything you developed was work for hire." "Check the licensing agreement, 2004, still binding, filed and registered." More silence. "We'll need to verify that claim," he said finally, his voice slipping. "Take your time," I said, and then I hung up. They hadn't just underestimated the code. They underestimated the person who wrote it. We met at a diner in Tacoma, the kind with chipped coffee cups and laminated menus that haven't changed in 20 years. Harold was already at the booth when I walked in. silver hair a little longer than I remembered, a worn leather briefcase at his side. He looked tired, but alert, like someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to speak. "Didn't think it would happen this fast," he said as I sat down. "It's falling apart," I replied. "They thought they could rebuild the engine while the car was moving." He stirred his coffee, then reached into his briefcase. "They never understood what they bought," he said quietly. "These equity guys, they see lines on a spreadsheet, not architecture, not people." He slid a manila folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of the original acquisition agreement from 2019, the sale that transferred Iron Vale into private hands. I remembered it vaguely, a blur of lawyers and signatures. I wasn't part of the deal. They didn't want the engineer in the room, just the asset. "Page 15, Harold said. I turned to it. A clause, buried halfway down in dense legal phrasing. My eyes narrowed as I read. If the core technology becomes materially non-functional for more than 10 consecutive business days, the seller reserves the right to reacquire the company's assets at a predetermined valuation. I looked up. They signed this? They didn't read it, he said. Too focused on closing the deal. I told them it was a protection clause, in case something went wrong after the handoff. And the valuation? $8 million. Locked. I leaned back, processing. You can buy it back. We can, Harold corrected. I've got $4 million lined up. The other half would have to come from partners. The words hung in the air, heavy, real. You knew this might happen, I said. I didn't know it would be this soon, he replied. But yes, I had a feeling. You were always the spine, Caleb. They just didn't see it. I stared out the window. The rain was back, tapping against the glass like it had something urgent to say. Why now? I asked. Because tomorrow's day 7, and if they keep breaking things, you'll hit 10. When that happens, we make our move. And if I say no, then I walk away. But I'd rather rebuild with someone who knows what this place was supposed to be. We paid the bill and walked out together. No promises, just quiet understanding. As I drove home, my mind didn't feel heavy like it had after the firing. It felt aligned, like gears clicking into place. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about restoration. The email came in just past midnight. No name, no signature, just a subject line. You should see this. I almost ignored it. Could have been spam or worse, but something about the timing made me click. The address was a burner, one of those encrypted, one-time use accounts. The message was brief, just a sentence. They're selling off pieces. You didn't hear it from me. Attached was a zip file. I downloaded it to an isolated drive, scanned it first, just in case, then opened it. Inside, internal memos, consultant reports, and most damning, draft contracts. They were planning to sell off Iron Vale's healthcare division to a competitor, a company already under investigation for patient data misuse. The documents detailed migration of proprietary client systems, reallocation of protected data, and language dancing dangerously close to breach of confidentiality. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal, and they'd kept it hidden. The consultants, Julian, the board, all of them trying to carve up the company while the foundation was still smoldering. I stared at the screen in disbelief, not because it was happening, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected since the day I was pushed out. This wasn't about strategy. It was about liquidation. I didn't know who sent it. Could have been Rebecca. Could have been anyone left inside with a conscience and a login. Whoever it was, they were taking a risk, and they wanted me to do something with it. I did. I forwarded the files to my lawyer. No commentary, just a subject line. Review immediately. He called me 20 minutes later. This isn't just leverage, he said. It's a bomb. You think it'll hold up? It'll hold up in court, in arbitration, and in front of every regulatory agency in the country. If these contracts go through, they'll be facing more than system failures. Try federal scrutiny. I closed the laptop slowly, the weight of it sinking in. It wasn't just a collapse now, it was exposure. I walked outside, stood on the deck and stared at the sky. The clouds had thinned. A few stars managed to push through. I hadn't seen stars clearly in weeks. Tomorrow would be day 8. 2 days to go. Iron Veil was bleeding money, hemorrhaging credibility, and now teetering on the edge of legal disaster. But they weren't just breaking their product. They were unraveling their soul. And for the first time since I walked out of that building, I felt the narrative shift. The story they'd written, about me being outdated, unnecessary, it was dissolving in real time. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to let the truth breathe. And it was already leaking out. Day 10 arrived quiet. No alarms, no press releases, no last-minute miracle patch from the consultants. Just silence, and the sound of a company's heartbeat flatlining beneath the surface. By mid-morning, 3 client servers were still offline. One had been down for almost a week. Customer support queues were backlogged by hundreds. The internal team had stopped pretending they had it under control. People were resigning. Others were just disappearing. I met Harold and my attorney in a private downtown office. Elaine joined by video call from her headquarters. The room was filled with files, coffee cups, and tension so thick you could fold it in half. "They've offered $3 million for permanent license transfer," my lawyer said. "They want this gone. Quietly, quickly. If we wait 14 more hours," Harold added, "we can exercise the buyback clause." Elaine didn't blink. "We're ready. $4 million for a 40% stake in the restructured company, contingent on Caleb taking over as CTO. I've got the transfer of funds prepared." They weren't playing games. Neither was I. I looked at Harold. "Employee protections?" "No layoffs for 6 months," he said. "And we'll implement the employee ownership program we talked about. Everyone gets a stake, everyone who stayed." I nodded. That sealed it for me. We signed the intent documents. My lawyer prepped the license reinstatement agreement with very specific conditions: transparency, authority, continuity. We would not walk into the same building that pushed us out. We'd walk into a company rebuilt from its knees, on our terms. At 5:00 p.m., we submitted formal notice of Harold's intent to buy the company under the original clause. At 6:00 p.m., Julian called. His voice cracked. "Caleb, whatever they're offering you, we'll match it. We'll double it. Just fix this today." "It's not about money." "Then what? A title? A press release? Name it." "It's about building something that matters," I said. "You tried to gut it for parts, and now you want me to pretend that didn't happen." I hung up. At 8:00 p.m., Julian was officially terminated by the board. The call came from one of the directors, someone who'd been there long before the acquisition. He sounded exhausted. "We made mistakes," he admitted, "but we can still do the right thing." I agreed. At 11:30 p.m., the board formally conceded. The buyback went through. Meridian's partnership was accepted. Paperwork signed. Funds transferred. At midnight, Iron Veil belonged to us again. I sat at my kitchen table with Karen beside me, typed out a message, and hit send. Subject: "We're back." Body: "The algorithm will be reinstated at 9 a.m. Iron Veil is under new ownership. No jobs will be lost. I'll explain everything at the all-hands tomorrow morning. Caleb." Karen rested her hand on mine. "You're going back?" "Not back," I said. "Forward." And for the first time in months, I slept. The conference room was full before I even walked in. Some faces I recognized immediately: engineers who had stayed through the collapse, project managers who'd worked alongside me for years. Others were newer, quiet, unsure. I saw Donna from accounting sitting in the front row. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. When I stepped up to the podium, she smiled. Not wide, but real. Harold stood beside me, looking energized in a way I hadn't seen since the early days. Elaine's face filled the large monitor at the front of the room. She gave a small wave. I nodded. It had been exactly 12 hours since the buyback. I cleared my throat and looked out at the team, what was left of it. "I know you've been through hell," I began. "I know there's confusion, exhaustion, anger, and a lot of unanswered questions." No one said a word. They just watched, waiting. I was let go without warning. No discussion, no knowledge transfer, no appreciation. Just removed. And many of you stayed, trying to hold this place together without the tools, without the clarity. You didn't fail. The people who made those decisions failed you. Still, silence. We're not here to gloat. This isn't revenge. It never was. This is restoration. And it starts today. Behind me, the screen shifted, showing the new platform interface. Integrasphere, streamlined, modular, scalable, still powered by the same algorithm, now hardened and refined with everything we'd learned. This is the new system, designed by the team, owned by the team. We've rebuilt the core architecture, cleaned up the legacy patches, and introduced a modular engine that'll allow real innovation, not just survival. I turned back to them. More than that. Effective today, every employee gets a stake in this company. A real one. 5% of Iron Veil has been allocated for employee ownership. If we're building something meaningful, everyone building it should benefit. A murmur moved through the room. Shock, gratitude, maybe even hope. Elaine spoke next, outlining the Meridian partnership. Joint ventures, long-term investment, shared development. Harold followed with the story behind the buyback clause, how it was never about regaining power, but protecting what mattered when the wrong hands tried to take it apart. Then I stepped forward again. We also have one more announcement. Every client affected by last month's system failure will receive 2 years of free service and full migration support to the new platform. That got a reaction. We're not doing it to look good. We're doing it because it's right. Because this company lost sight of what mattered, and now we fix it. The room erupted in applause. A few people stood. I caught Julian's name in a whisper from the back row. I didn't look. He was gone. What mattered now were the people who stayed. We weren't just rebuilding a company. We were rebuilding trust, culture, purpose, and we were doing it together. A year later, I stood on the docks at Lake Washington, the morning mist still clinging to the water like a secret. No laptop, no phone, just a thermos of coffee and a fishing rod that hadn't seen daylight in too long. Harold waved from the boat. Same beat-up cap, same crooked grin. We didn't say much as I climbed aboard. Didn't need to. We pushed off in silence, the motor humming softly beneath our feet. The city behind us disappeared as we cut through the fog, finding the spot Harold always claimed was lucky. It rarely was. But that was never the point. We cast our lines and sat back. "How's it feel?" he asked after a while. "Strange," I said. "Good. Balanced, maybe." He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. The past 12 months had been the hardest, most rewarding of my career. We didn't just fix what was broken, we reimagined it. The company was leaner, stronger, built around collaboration instead of control. The old board was gone, so were the consultants, and the buzzwords. We released 3 major updates to Integrasphere, reclaimed every lost client, even gained new ones. The press had shifted from calling us a cautionary tale to a comeback story. But none of that was what stuck with me most. What stuck was the way people showed up again. The engineers who once stayed late out of fear now stayed because they believed. The break room was full again. Laughter, debates, ideas, and every one of them owned a piece of it. Harold reeled in his line. Empty hook. He didn't care. "Board approved the expansion of the ownership program," he said. "Another 5%. "Good," I said. "They've earned it." I looked across the water, past the trees, where the Iron Veil building peeked through. The logo had changed. Subtle, modern, but still familiar. A reflection of what we'd become. Not a rebirth exactly, a correction. You ever think about how it all played out? Harold asked. All the time, I said. The firing, the collapse, the buyback. Every step felt like an ending. But now, I don't know. It feels like it had to happen, like we had to break before we could rebuild right. He nodded slowly. You regret staying all those years? I thought about the missed birthdays, the dinners reheated after midnight, the mornings I left before the sun came up. Then I thought about the people, the problems we solved, the things we built from nothing. I thought about how, for the first time in my life, I didn't just work at a company. I belonged to something. No, I said. I don't regret it. I just understand it now. A tug on my line. I stood, careful, reeled it in. Not a monster, but decent. Enough. We laughed, the way you do when the work's behind you and the water's calm. Iron Veil wasn't the same company. It was ours now, and that made all the difference.